welcome to flip video 8.1. This will be the first in a series of flip videos to introduce you to the French Revolution. And the first of the flip videos, of course, will discuss the causes. So please go ahead and title the notes as such. Now, these notes are going to be a little bit different, so I'm going to be encouraging you to set up in a very logical and chronological way, but they're not going to have a built-in set of what you should be writing on the left-hand side versus the right-hand side. So some of them I'm going to rely on you to do on your own to make sure you're not just writing on the right-hand side of the notes. Other times I'm going to pause and say, please at this time stop and put something on the left. So please prepare for that in your note-taking. So let's start off first with the reasons or the causes of the French Revolution. So I would put on the left-hand side to get you started for the first one, I would put the word setting. So we established the setting. Absolutely no reason to be copying these word for word since these are written in sentences. Please abbreviate. So to start us off, in the setting here, in the 1700s, France was the cultural capital of Europe. Many of those Enlightenment thinkers we just spent much time learning about were in France. France was this cultural hub. We have these Enlightenment ideas flowing, and they were also a particularly economically powerful country at the time. More specifically, we have the King Louis XIV. King Louis XIV was the most powerful king of Europe at this time. And in his death, we had Louis XV and Louis XVI, who continued to rule as absolute monarchs. And they, of course, are still housed in Versailles, that beautiful palace that we looked at. And they are continuing these traditions of tremendous aristocracy, meaning tremendous power and tremendous wealth concentrated in the figure of the monarch. But we have political and economic problems that are going to emerge, and as you see pictured here is King Louis XVI. We're going to have political and economic problems that are going to lead to the full-on French Revolution that begins in 1789. One of the initial problems, so on the left-hand side, I would put something on the left here that alludes to the idea this is one of the underlying problems. So one of the underlying issues here is that France had a very unequal social hierarchy. Hierarchy, of course, is that class idea, the idea that something is higher than another. I introduced this to you when we talked about the changing evolution after the fall of mineralism and the rise here of nationalism and of countries. What we have is three separate classes, three separate estates. That's what I'm referring to them as, what they're referred to as. The first estate was the clergy, right? The Roman Catholic Church. So on the left-hand side, I would put first estate. The first estate are the clergy. Clergy, of course, being the priests and the people associated with the church. They owned 10% of the land in France, but paid little in taxes to the government. And that's important because taxes are what makes the government function. So this is a class that's a privileged class. Similarly, we have the second estate. And check out the percentages of the population that you can see there. The first estate was less than 1%. Second estate is 2%. This second estate, put that on the left, was made up of the rich nobles. So this is our noble class of people. They owned 20% of French land, but they were entirely exempt from paying taxes. So we have what is essentially 3% of the population that's not paying taxes, but these are wealthy people. These are people of power, of privilege in the society. And we have a 97% of the rest of the society. It comprises the third estate, right? So left-hand side is the third estate. This is 97% of the population, and it expanded all the way from poor peasants all the way up into the well-educated and the middle class. Here's a term that's good to put on the left-hand side as well. The term is bourgeoisie. This is actually where the term bougie comes from. It stands for bourgeoisie. This is the well-educated and middle class of the French society, the bourgeoisie, important term. This is the group who paid up to 50% of their income in taxes. So clearly we have an unequal distribution of taxation. We have a very privileged class at the top of French society. And keep in mind, on the back burner here, what's about to come to head is you've got a well-educated society who's now preaching the ideas of the Enlightenment, that things need to be rational, fair, that all men are born equal, that equal should be treated equal under the law. So you can see how this system is already going to become challenged by the ideas of the Enlightenment. The members of the third estate, so I would say on the left-hand side here too, underlying problems or the continuation of the problems. The members of the third estate clearly resented this special treatment that the first and the second estates received. This graphic here is a very famous one that portrays the clergy and the noble on the backs here of the 97% of the population, meaning the third estate. The members of the Third Estate gain inspiration from these ideas of John Locke, of the natural rights to man, of Rousseau, this social contract that should be existing between the ruler and the ruled, concepts of Voltaire, this idea that the government stands to protect the rights of its people. And they're starting to see this system of that has been long-standing of the social classes in a very different light, and they're going to soon challenge this system. On the left-hand side, I would also put here now for this last bullet point here of inspiration on the left-hand side. After the success of the American Revolution, the Third Estate began demanding democracy, equality, and liberty. This is going to become the slogan, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, was what that's known as, the slogan of the French Revolution. They're going to be seeking more democratic voices, meaning that the people are going to have a voice in their government, equal treatment and equal people, equal treatment under the law, and equal rights, and freedom for the people of France. So we're starting to see how this system, how this revolution is getting underway. I would put that next phrase there, social tensions. That's what I put on the left-hand side. I'm sorry, growing problems is what I would put on the left-hand side of my notes here. The social tensions were made worse by the fact that there was a growing financial crisis occurring in the 1770s and the 1780s in France. The French government had massive, massive debt. And they had this debt not because of, let's say, an economic downturn, but rather it was because of this lavish spending at the hands of the monarchies and the royalty. Very expensive wars that many of the people of France, the French society, didn't even agree with to begin with, and why the French were fighting them. And there was just simply poor economic planning. So we're really seeing a failure of leadership here, and that the French people are going to be becoming increasingly critical of the society. We won't get too much into the details of the background wars here, but you can see that under Louis XIV, check out the debt. The government, 80% of its total revenue, the amount of money it was pulling in each year, 86% of that was going to debt, to pay to debt. So this is just an unbelievable amount of money being spent. As you can see, that 7 Years' War is actually known as the French and Indian War in the United States, and that you can see that the French intervention in that war continued to further some of the debts. So when you have an unequal social class system, people are increasingly aware of the ideas of the Enlightenment. This is really setting the scene for some big changes. The French, by 1789, as it says here, half of the budget went towards interest on the national debt. That means half of the budget is going towards not even the debt itself. If I have $100 and I'm paying 3% interest on that every day, then the next day, if I don't pay it back, it's 103, then 103% of 103, and so on and so forth. So 50% of the budget's going just to interest. That's just an absolutely unreal amount of debt to be paying. 25% of the people were unemployed in France. If you have now, again, add to all of these tensions, these changes and challenges, that you have people who are unemployed, you're going to clearly get a population who's ready for some change. I would put on the left-hand side here Marie Antoinette, just so she's very famous. You may have heard that name before. She's sort of the epitome, the example of this lavish spending and this irresponsible economic leadership. King Louis XVI, excuse me, and his wife Marie Antoinette. She's very famous. It's a rumor. It didn't actually happen, but she's rumored to have said at one point in this revolution that when her people were starving and they couldn't buy bread, she's rumored to have said, "Let them eat cake," right? Which is so as to imply that the bread is not clearly the people can't buy cake if they can't buy bread, and so they're clearly exhibiting her what she was rumored to have been so distant from the actual people themselves and their experiences. And I'm missing something right there. Let's see if I can get that. There we go. Okay. By 1789, France, why is that happening? There we go. France was out of money and faced a serious financial crisis. So I'd put by 1789 on the left-hand side here. Again, on the left-hand side underneath that, what King Louis XVI did is he called a meeting of what's called the Estates General. Now, this can be a little confusing because, again, the social classes were called the estates. But the term the Estates General refers to this legislative body, this group of people coming together to create laws, where members from all three classes could advise the king. Now, this was the first time in over 500 years this Estates General has met. So this is in and of itself a remarkable event in the French history. And it really showed the depth of the crisis that they were facing. So King Louis XVI calls this Estates General to come together in this meeting where the three classes are supposed to advise him. I'll be on the right-hand side of my notes now since Estates General is on the left. On the right-hand side here, the first and the second estates were voting to increase taxes on the third estate. Moreover, the first and third estates decided that they would be voting by order, meaning that the first estate would get one vote, the second estate would get one vote, and the third estate would get one vote. That's madness. Go back to the distribution of people for a second. That means that this 1% of people would get one vote, this 2% of people would get one vote, and this 97% would also get one vote. So it's no surprise at all, that this measure that they have proposed here for the first estate and the second estate to have a single vote, and the third estate, their measure then to raise taxes on the third estate, of course they're going to do so. They're exempt from it. So 2-1, 2-1, 2-1. Clearly, the people of the third estate their voices are going to be completely silenced in this meeting. Well, the third estate isn't having it. And the third estate storms out of this meeting. And here you can see again, if you have 648 commoners, this is crazy. The third estate had 648 people at this meeting. First estate had 300, second estate had 300. Then they suggested this voting pattern of 1-1-1. Madness. And clearly did not allow the third estate to be represented in this body. What they then did is the third estate stormed out, right? Stormed out. I would put on the left-hand side, maybe even an arrow to show that the States General then leads to this new creation. The third estate formed a new body. They said, okay, no problem. You're going to vote us out. In fact, they showed up the next day to the meeting, and they were locked out of this meeting of the Estates General. And what you're seeing portrayed here in this picture is they said, no problem, you're going to lock us out? We'll meet anywhere. We're going to go meet on the tennis court of this building if you're going to lock us out of this building so you can't hear our voices. And that's what you see here. In 1789, this National Assembly, this new group, they took an oath that's known as the Tennis Court Oath, a good term to put on the left-hand side. This tennis court oath was this allegiance, this pledge that they're going to come together and create a new constitution. And that new constitution was going to get rid of this whole concept of the estates. They were going to create a fair and democratic system. They're going to be limiting the king's power. And they're going to be making laws that represent the full entire body of the French people and not just the first and second estate. So this is what is called the Tennis Court Oath. And this marked the creation of this National Assembly. Naturally, this is only going to be people of the third estate. This does not include the clergy or the nobles. The most famous document perhaps of this whole revolution, or the famous cause, the real root of the heart of this revolution, was encapsulated in this document that's known as, on the left-hand side, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. This is this revolutionary document that the National Assembly says these are the causes that we are working for. These are what we're fighting for. And this document said things like, men are born free and equal in rights, that these rights are liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. You can imagine, you can just hear the Enlightenment here. It guaranteed the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, and of equal justice. So the third estate has stormed out of this estate, this unfair assembly. They've created their own. They've pledged to these different ideals. So in many ways, the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen really spell out what it is that the revolution was working towards, or what they claimed to be working towards. Meanwhile, okay, and I would say on the left-hand side, I think meanwhile is even a great thing to put there, right? Meanwhile, continued events. Meanwhile, this economic crisis is continuing. Citizens were without food. They were facing starvation. These angry protesters in Paris were demanding new reforms. So we're starting to see people take to the streets. And when you see people taking to the streets to protest, it's really an indication that the revolution is starting and that a full and complete change is on its way. There was actually a very famous march here, which you see is actually a march of women. This is known as the Women's Bread Marches because the price of bread went up. And this is when that famous quote from Marie Antoinette that I mentioned already. And these women are, rumors said, this is actually not historically accurate, but the rumors are that she said to these women that they want bread, they can't afford bread, we'll let them eat cake, right? This is where that is really, that the phrase came from. I'll put on the left-hand side of your notes the term that you see here, Bastille, the Bastille. So when the rumors circulated here, when these protesters are on the street, the women are protesting for their bread, They're protesting bread prices. Really, Paris is starting, it's like a ticking time bomb here. And there was a rumor that went out that the king was going to send his army to Paris to shut down this revolution, to shut down these protesters. Well, the citizens decided that they needed to defend themselves, and they went to the place that they knew they could find the firearms to do so, which is known as Bastille, and the prison, the local prison, and it was really an armory that held weapons, and they stormed it. And what is known as the storming of the Bastille, this marks the beginning of what's known really here as the French Revolution, because now we have a government who's about to confront its citizens. We've now hit a point of true revolution. Many ways, the beginning of some of the violence that's going to become to be associated with this revolution. But that there marks the beginning of the French Revolution. In the next video, we're going to take on the stages.